I'm Allison, and I'm 28 years old. My sister just ripped away my crutches in front of my entire family, sending me crashing to the concrete patio. The searing pain shooting through my surgically repaired knee was nothing compared to the sound of their laughter. But as I lay there, phone in hand, I realized this moment would change everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely alone when you needed family most. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Before all this happened, I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong about everything. My accident happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was rushing down the stairs from my apartment, already running late for work, when my heel caught on the edge of a step. The fall seemed to happen in slow motion, but the crack of my kneecap hitting the concrete was instant and unmistakable. The emergency room doctor was blunt. Complete patellar fracture with significant damage to surrounding ligaments. Surgery was scheduled for the following day, a complex procedure that would require screws and extensive rehabilitation. I called my parents first, then my sister Rebecca, then my brother Michael. The responses were surprisingly similar. "Oh, honey, that's terrible," Mom said, her voice distracted. "We'll try to visit when we can. Your father has that conference in Denver this week." Rebecca sounded annoyed. "God. Allison, you're so clumsy. I can't take time off right now. The Peterson case goes to trial next month." She was a junior associate at a prestigious law firm, a fact she mentioned in every conversation. Michael was more direct. "That sucks, sis. I'm swamped with the restaurant opening. You know how it is." "No," I thought, hanging up after the third lukewarm response. I didn't know how it was. When Michael had food poisoning last year, I drove 4 hours to take care of him. When Rebecca needed someone to pet sit her neurotic cat for 2 weeks, I rearranged my entire schedule. When Dad needed help moving furniture after his back surgery, I was there despite having a deadline at work. But apparently, a shattered kneecap didn't warrant the same consideration. My friend Jake became my lifeline. A nurse practitioner with kind eyes and infinite patience, he took vacation days to help me through the surgery and initial recovery. While I was unconscious in the operating room, my family was living their lives as if nothing had changed. I woke up alone except for Jake, who squeezed my hand and told me everything had gone well. The surgeon explained the hardware now holding my kneecap together, the weeks of non-weight bearing, the months of physical therapy ahead. Through the haze of anesthesia, I kept looking toward the door, expecting to see familiar faces. They never came. Jake wheeled me out of the hospital 5 days later. My parents' driveway felt foreign as we pulled up, like visiting a house I'd only seen in photographs. The guest room downstairs had been hastily prepared with mismatched sheets and a borrowed bedside table. "We figured this would be easier," Mom explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "You know, avoiding the stairs." What she meant was avoiding disruption to their routine. Dad barely looked up from his newspaper when Jake helped me settle into the wheelchair. Rebecca breezed through an hour later, assessed the situation with clinical detachment, and announced she'd be working late every night for the foreseeable future. "Try not to be too much trouble," she said, already heading back out the door. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed listening to my parents' muffled television upstairs, I began to understand that recovery would be a more solitary journey than I'd imagined. The prescription bottles on the nightstand caught the streetlight filtering through thin curtains, and I counted pills like rosary beads, marking time until I could reclaim my independence. But first, I had to survive living with people who saw me as an inconvenience rather than their daughter who needed help. The first week taught me exactly where I stood in my family's priorities, somewhere below their morning coffee routine and slightly above taking out the trash. Jake arrived every morning at 7:30 to help me get ready for physical therapy, a routine that my family quickly took for granted. "Your friend is so dedicated," Mom commented one morning, buttering toast while I struggled to maneuver my wheelchair around the kitchen island. She made no offer to help, just watched me navigate the obstacle course of chairs and dog bowls with mild interest. Physical therapy was excruciating. The sessions involved bending my leg mere degrees at a time, each movement sending lightning bolts of pain through the surgical site. My therapist, Maria, pushed me relentlessly but kindly. "The first month is the hardest," she said, manipulating my knee joint while I gripped the table edges. "But you're young and determined. You'll get through this." I wanted to believe her. But returning home each day to indifferent faces made determination feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. Dad had returned from his Denver conference with stories about industry connections and networking opportunities. He spent dinner describing restaurant recommendations while I picked at my plate, exhausted from the morning's therapy session. "You're awfully quiet," he observed, as if my silence was a character flaw rather than a symptom of isolation. The nights were the worst. Pain medication left me groggy but not truly restful, and the guest room faced the street where late-night traffic created a soundtrack of other people going places I couldn't reach. I started spending hours on my laptop, working remotely and losing myself in projects that demanded focus, but not physical mobility. My supervisor, thankfully, was understanding. "Take all the time you need," she'd said. "We'll manage without you for now." The irony wasn't lost on me that my workplace showed more compassion than my childhood home. Rebecca's visits became increasingly brief and pointed. She'd appear between meetings, offer cursory inquiries about my progress, then launch into detailed complaints about her caseload. "Some people don't realize how demanding real careers can be," she said one afternoon, scrolling through emails while I struggled to elevate my leg properly. The comment stung because it contained a grain of truth that hurt more than outright cruelty. My job in nonprofit communications didn't command the respect of Rebecca's legal career or Michael's restaurant venture, but it mattered to me, and the foundation we supported changed lives daily. "At least you have time to rest now," she added, not looking up from her phone. Must be nice not having any real responsibilities. That night, I called Jake from my makeshift bedroom. "I think I made a mistake coming here," I admitted, watching shadows move across the ceiling. "They don't want me here." "Where else would you go?" he asked gently. "You need help right now, and families are supposed to help." "Supposed to," I repeated. That's the operative phrase. But Jake was right about one thing. I had nowhere else to go. My apartment was a third-floor walk-up, and my savings were quickly depleting between medical bills and lost income. I was trapped in a house where my presence felt tolerated rather than welcomed. The breaking point came during my second week home. I'd hired a nursing aide to help with morning hygiene since maneuvering the shower chair required assistance I wasn't getting from family. The expense stretched my budget thin, but independence in basic tasks felt worth the cost. Rebecca cornered me after the aide left. "Really, Allison? Paying someone to help you shower? We're here, you know." "Are you?" I asked, meeting her gaze directly. "Because I've been here 10 days and the only help I've gotten is from Jake and the aide I'm paying myself." Her expression hardened. "We all have lives, you know. We can't drop everything because you fell down some stairs." Fell down some stairs. As if my injury was a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering event that would take months to overcome. As if the surgical reconstruction and hardware now permanently part of my body was dramatic overreaction to clumsiness. That conversation crystallized something I'd been trying to deny. My family hadn't forgotten to help me. They'd chosen not to. By the third week, our household had settled into a routine that felt more like reluctant coexistence than family recovery. Jake's morning visits became the highlight of my day, partly because he treated me like a person rather than an inconvenience, and partly because his nursing expertise meant I could trust his assessment of my progress. "You're healing well," he said one morning, examining the surgical site with professional detachment. "The swelling is down significantly, and your range of motion is improving faster than expected." His optimism felt foreign in a house where my presence seemed to darken every room I entered. Dad had started eating breakfast in his study to avoid morning small talk. Mom had rearranged her schedule to be gone during my therapy return times. Rebecca's visits had dwindled to quick appearances between her real obligations. The one constant was her commentary. "Still using that thing?" she'd ask, gesturing toward my wheelchair as if it was a lifestyle choice rather than medical necessity. Or my personal favorite. "Some people bounce back faster than others, I suppose." Each comment was carefully calibrated to sound concerned while delivering maximum impact. Rebecca had perfected the art of plausible deniability, wrapping cruelty and sisterly worry so expertly that calling her out felt like overreaction. But Jake noticed. "Does she always talk to you like that?" he asked after overhearing one of Rebecca's observations about people who milk injuries for attention. "She's stressed about work," I deflected, though the excuse felt hollow even to me. "Everyone's stressed about something," he replied quietly. "That doesn't justify being cruel to people we love." Love. The word hung between us like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Did my family love me? I'd assumed so for 28 years, but assumption and evidence were proving to be very different things. My parents had just returned from a trip to Napa Valley that I'd gifted them for their anniversary. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. I'd used my entire quarterly bonus to send them on a wine country retreat, complete with private tastings and a luxury resort stay. They'd gushed about the experience over dinner, showing photos and describing each memorable meal in vivid detail. Not once did they acknowledge the sacrifice I'd made to give them that experience. Not once did they connect my generosity to their current obligation to help me. Instead, Dad complained about the cost of my physical therapy. These sessions add up quickly, he muttered, sorting through insurance papers. Maybe you could stretch them out a bit, every other day instead of daily. The suggestion was so breathtakingly tone-deaf that I almost laughed. My knees' recovery timeline wasn't negotiable, and delaying therapy would only prolong my dependence on them. But from his perspective, my medical needs were optional expenses that inconvenienced the household budget. The doctor said daily sessions are crucial for the first month, I explained patiently. Doctors always say that, he dismissed. They make money every time you walk through the door. This from a man who just spent a week drinking $100 bottles of wine on my dime. But pointing that out would make me ungrateful, according to family mythology that painted any request for reciprocity as selfish entitlement. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt both liberating and terrifying. I fired the nursing aide. The expense was becoming unsustainable, and I'd regained enough mobility to manage most daily tasks independently. It was risky, but staying in debt to maintain dignity in a house where I had none felt like a losing proposition. The transition to managing alone was harder than I'd expected. Showering became a carefully choreographed event involving waterproof bandages and strategic use of grab bars. Getting dressed required advanced planning and patience I didn't always possess, but the independence was worth the struggle. Each small victory, each task completed without help or witness, rebuilt something Rebecca's comments had been steadily eroding. I was still their daughter, still deserving of basic consideration, regardless of their apparent belief otherwise. When Jake arrived the next morning to find me fully dressed and ready for therapy, his smile was radiant. "Look at you," he said with genuine pride. "You're getting stronger every day." I was. Despite their indifference, despite Rebecca's cruelty, despite feeling like an intruder in my childhood home, I was healing. And with each day of progress came clearer understanding of exactly who my family really was. The day I graduated from wheelchair to crutches should have been a celebration. Instead, it became Rebecca's inspiration for a whole new category of humiliation. The transition happened exactly 4 weeks after surgery, when Maria finally declared my healing sufficient for partial weight bearing. "Remember, these are tools, not decorations," she instructed, adjusting the crutches to my height. "Start slowly, listen to your body, and don't try to be a hero." The freedom was intoxicating. After a month of wheels and dependence, moving under my own power felt revolutionary. I could access kitchen cabinets, reach items from higher shelves, and most importantly, shower without the complicated logistics that had defined my recent existence. Jake was thrilled. "This changes everything," he said, watching me navigate the therapy center hallway with cautious optimism. "You'll be able to do so much more for yourself now." I expected similar enthusiasm from my family. Instead, I was met with something far more disturbing: amusement. Dad chuckled when I appeared in the kitchen for dinner, moving carefully but independently. "Look who's up and walking," he said with the same tone he'd used to comment on a clever dog trick. Mom was more direct in her dismissal. "Well, it's about time. I was starting to think you enjoyed all the attention." But Rebecca, as always, delivered the most pointed observations. "Oh, good," she said, barely looking up from her phone. "Maybe now you can start pulling your weight around here instead of acting like an invalid." Acting like an invalid. For someone who'd completed law school, Rebecca seemed remarkably unclear on the definition of actual medical conditions versus performance art. Still, the crutches did restore some autonomy. I could navigate the house without announcing my needs to indifferent family members. I could prepare simple meals, manage my own medication schedule, and most importantly, shower without timing requests around everyone else's convenience. The improvement in my daily life seemed to irritate Rebecca more than my previous helplessness had. "You know, some people would be grateful for all the help they've received," she commented one evening, watching me wash dishes that nobody else had volunteered to handle. "What help?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Living here rent-free, obviously. Having your meals provided. Not having to worry about household responsibilities while you recover." Her revision of history was so comprehensive it bordered on artistic. Living rent-free in a guest room where I felt unwelcome. Having meals provided by eating whatever happened to be available when I could access the kitchen. Not worrying about household responsibilities because I'd been systematically excluded from family life since arriving. "I've been buying my own groceries," I pointed out calmly. "Well, using our kitchen, our utilities, our space." The itemization of my costs to their household was particularly rich, coming from someone who'd lived at home until she was 26, saving money for law school while contributing nothing to household expenses. But pointing out hypocrisy to Rebecca was like explaining color to someone who insisted on seeing the world in black and white. Jake noticed the increasing tension during his visits. "She's getting worse," he observed one morning after Rebecca had made another comment about people who take advantage of family generosity. "She's always been like this," I admitted. "I just used to think it was normal sibling rivalry." "This isn't rivalry," he said seriously. "This is something else entirely." He was right, but acknowledging it meant accepting that my sister actively disliked me for reasons that had nothing to do with my injury or current situation. Rebecca's hostility predated my accident, though my vulnerability had certainly amplified her willingness to express it. Dad's 70th birthday was approaching, and Mom had been planning a backyard barbecue for weeks. The guest list included extended family, longtime neighbors, and Dad's former colleagues. I'd offered to help with preparations, but Mom had waved away my suggestions with barely concealed irritation. "We have everything handled," she said firmly. "Just focus on getting better so you won't be hobbling around during the party." The comment stung, but it also revealed something important about their perspective. My crutches weren't medical equipment supporting my recovery. They were embarrassing accessories that reflected poorly on our family image. 3 days before the party, Rebecca approached me with unusual directness. "You're not seriously planning to use those things at Dad's birthday, are you?" She gestured toward my crutches with obvious distaste. "I need them to walk," I replied, stating what seemed obvious. "It's going to look pathetic. All those people staring at you, feeling sorry for you. Dad doesn't need that kind of attention on his special day." The suggestion was clear. My medical needs were less important than appearances, but I was beyond caring about Rebecca's comfort level with my recovery process. "I'll try not to ruin the party with my visible healing," I said dryly. Her expression hardened. "Everything's always a joke with you, isn't it? You never take anything seriously." Actually, I took many things seriously, like recovery, like family, like the growing realization that the people I'd spent my life loving and supporting viewed me as a burden to be managed rather than a person deserving care. But I was about to learn exactly how deep their resentment ran. Dad's birthday party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, a perfect spring day with mild temperatures and cloudless skies. Mom had spent the week preparing elaborate appetizers and coordinating with the caterer handling the main course. The backyard had been transformed into an elegant celebration space with string lights, round tables, and a designated area for Dad's favorite jazz playlist. I woke that morning feeling optimistic for the first time in weeks. My progress with the crutches had been steady, and I'd even managed to help with some party preparations, despite Mom's insistence that I just rest. The guest list included people I hadn't seen since before my accident, and I looked forward to conversations that extended beyond medical updates and family obligations. Jake had offered to stay for the party, but I'd declined. "I need to prove I can manage social situations independently," I'd explained. "Besides, it's family time." How naive that sounds now, knowing what I know about my family's definition of inclusion. I chose my outfit carefully. A sundress that accommodated my healing knee, comfortable sandals that worked with crutches, and jewelry that reflected the celebratory nature of the occasion. When I appeared in the kitchen that morning, Mom's expression flickered between approval and concern. "You look lovely, dear. Just please be careful with those things around the guests." Those things. My crutches had become unnamed objects that embarrassed her rather than medical equipment that enabled my mobility. But I nodded agreeably, determined to enjoy the day despite her obvious discomfort with my visible recovery. The first guests arrived at noon, and the party quickly developed the warm, convivial atmosphere that made Dad's celebrations memorable. I stationed myself near the appetizer table, where conversation flowed easily, and my crutches became less conspicuous among people focused on food and fellowship. Uncle Robert, Dad's oldest friend, greeted me with genuine warmth. "Allison, I heard about your accident. How are you managing?" For the first time in weeks, someone asked about my well-being with authentic concern rather than obligatory politeness. I found myself sharing honest details about physical therapy, recovery timelines, and the challenges of regaining full mobility. "These things take time," he said sagely. "My hip replacement took months before I felt normal again, but you're young and strong. You'll bounce back." His encouragement felt like sunshine after weeks of clouds. Other guests offered similar support, sharing their own recovery stories and asking thoughtful questions about my progress. For a brief interlude, I remembered what it felt like to be surrounded by people who cared about my well-being. But Rebecca was watching from across the patio, her expression growing darker with each supportive conversation I had. She'd positioned herself near the bar, where she could observe while maintaining distance from the scene that clearly bothered her. Around 3 o'clock, Dad called for attention to make his traditional birthday toast. The crowd gathered in a loose circle around the patio while he thanked everyone for sharing his special day. The speech was vintage Dad, gracious, slightly rambling, and filled with references to friendship, family, and the passage of time. To another year of health and happiness, he concluded, raising his glass. The crowd responded enthusiastically, and conversations resumed with the enhanced warmth that comes from shared celebration. I was talking with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, about her grandson's college plans when I noticed Rebecca approaching through the crowd. Her expression had shifted from distant observation to active determination, and something in her posture triggered an alarm I couldn't quite identify. "Having fun playing the victim?" she asked quietly, positioning herself beside me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm talking with Mrs. Patterson about college applications," I replied evenly. "Oh, I'm sure everyone loves hearing about your struggles," she continued, her voice pitched for my ears only. "So brave, so inspiring, poor little Allison and her tragic accident." Mrs. Patterson had moved on to other conversations, leaving me alone with Rebecca's increasingly pointed observations. Around us, the party continued with laughter and music, creating a strange contrast to the tension building between us. "I'm just enjoying Dad's party," I said, trying to diffuse whatever was building in her expression. "Are you? Because it looks to me like you're enjoying the attention. All these people feeling sorry for you, asking about your recovery. It's like your own personal pity party." Her words hit their intended target. I had been grateful for the genuine concern, the first kindness I'd experienced in weeks. But Rebecca was reframing that support as manipulation, suggesting that my acceptance of sympathy was somehow calculated rather than human. "People are being nice," I said quietly. "That's what people do when someone's hurt." "When someone's actually hurt," she corrected. "Not when they're milking an injury for maximum sympathy." The conversation was attracting attention from nearby guests who couldn't hear the words, but could sense the tension. I needed to end this before Rebecca's hostility became public entertainment, but something in her expression suggested she was just getting started. That's when she smiled, and I knew the worst was yet to come. The moment Rebecca smiled, that cold, calculating smile, I should have walked away, should have extracted myself from whatever was building in her expression and found safety among the other guests. Instead, I stood frozen, balancing on my crutches while she prepared to deliver whatever cruel finale she'd been planning. "You know what everyone's really thinking?" she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "They're wondering how much longer you're going to drag this out." People were definitely watching now. Uncle Robert paused mid-conversation with Dad. Mrs. Patterson glanced over with obvious concern. The party's warm atmosphere was shifting as guests picked up on the tension radiating from our corner of the patio. "Rebecca, please," I said quietly. "It's Dad's birthday." "Exactly," she replied, her smile widening. "Dad's birthday, his special day, and here you are making it all about your dramatic recovery story." She was building to something, and I could feel the weight of gathering attention as more people became aware of our conversation. Dad had stopped talking entirely, his expression shifting from confusion to apprehension as he recognized the signs of Rebecca in attack mode. "I think maybe we should," I started to say, attempting to diffuse the situation before it escalated further. But Rebecca was done with subtle cruelty. She was ready for the main event. "Stop the act," she announced loudly, her voice dripping with theatrical contempt. "You're just a leech pretending to be hurt so people will feel sorry for you." The party went silent. Complete, absolute silence except for the jazz music still playing from the speakers that nobody thought to turn off. Every face was turned toward us, every conversation suspended as guests processed what they'd just witnessed. Before I could react, before I could step back or respond or do anything to protect myself, Rebecca grabbed my crutches and yanked them away with brutal efficiency. I went down hard. The concrete patio met my knees with devastating force, the impact sending shockwaves through my surgically repaired joint and radiating up my spine. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, erasing everything except the fire consuming my leg and the sound of my own gasping. But worse than the pain was the laughter. Not everyone laughed. Uncle Robert's face went white with shock. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth in horror. Several guests stepped forward instinctively before stopping themselves, uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented breach of human decency. But enough people laughed. Dad chuckled nervously, as if Rebecca had performed a clever party trick rather than committed assault. Mom made a sound that might have been amusement or might have been shock. Michael, who'd been watching from the barbecue grill, actually applauded. I knelt on the concrete. Crutches scattered beyond my reach, surrounded by people who found my pain entertaining rather than concerning. The humiliation was complete and perfect. exactly as Rebecca had planned. For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the reality of what had just happened and how my own family was responding to it. Then training kicked in. All those years of managing crisis situations at work, all that experience staying calm under pressure, finally served a purpose beyond professional success. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? My voice was steady, clear, and loud enough for everyone to hear. I need an ambulance. I just had knee surgery and someone deliberately knocked me down, causing additional injury to my surgical site. The party atmosphere evaporated instantly. Rebecca's triumphant expression shifted to uncertainty as she realized I'd departed from her script. Dad started to move toward me, his face suddenly serious as the word ambulance registered. Ma'am, are you in a safe location now? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I'm at a family gathering, but I need medical attention immediately. An ambulance is being dispatched to your location. Can you tell me exactly what happened? And surrounded by my family and their friends, with Rebecca still standing over me holding my crutches like trophies, I told the truth. My sister intentionally took away my mobility aids and pushed me down. I'm in significant pain and can't stand up. The silence was profound now. No one was laughing anymore. No one was moving to help, but no one was treating this as entertainment either. Because I had just transformed their private family drama into a matter of public record. And as we all waited for the ambulance to arrive, I realized that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to suffer in silence. Rebecca's face had gone pale. The party was over, and my real recovery was about to begin. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, though it felt like hours. I remained on the concrete patio, phone in hand, while my family stood frozen in a tableau of guilt and confusion. Rebecca had finally dropped my crutches, but nobody moved to retrieve them or help me reach them. Ma'am, I'm Paramedic Johnson, the first responder said, kneeling beside me with professional calm. Can you tell me what happened here? For the third time in 10 minutes, I explained how my sister had deliberately removed my mobility aids and caused my fall. Johnson's expression remained neutral, but his partner, Rodriguez, was taking detailed notes and photographing the scene. Any witnesses? Rodriguez asked, gesturing toward the silent crowd of party guests. About 30 of them, I replied, meeting Dad's horrified gaze. This happened in front of everyone. Johnson examined my knee with gentle efficiency. The surgical site was swollen and angry, already showing signs of trauma that made his expression tighten with concern. We need to transport you for evaluation, he announced. This could be serious damage to recent surgical repair. As they prepared the gurney, I heard Dad attempting damage control. There's been a misunderstanding, he told Johnson desperately. This is a family matter. Sisters, you know how they can be. Sir, Johnson replied firmly, assault is not a family matter. It's a criminal matter. The word assault hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rebecca's face had shifted from pale to green, and Mom was making small distressed sounds that might have been sympathy if they'd been directed toward me instead of toward the situation. They loaded me into the ambulance with careful precision, and as the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the ruined party. Guests were already leaving, conversations hushed and urgent. The celebration was over, but the real consequences were just beginning. Jake met us at the emergency room, having received my panicked call during the ambulance ride. His face was thunderous as he listened to my explanation, and when the attending physician described the additional damage to my knee, his professional composure cracked entirely. Someone did this deliberately? He asked, voice tight with controlled fury. My sister, I confirmed, watching his expression cycle through disbelief, rage, and protective determination. Dr. Martinez, the orthopedic surgeon, reviewed my x-rays with grim focus. The hardware is still intact, but there's significant soft tissue damage and possible ligament tears. We'll need to go back in surgically to assess and repair. Back to surgery. Back to the beginning of recovery. Weeks of progress erased in 30 seconds of Rebecca's cruelty. I'll be staying with my friend this time, I told Dr. Martinez firmly. Not with family. Jake squeezed my hand. You'll stay with me as long as you need. Surgery was scheduled for the following morning. A more complex procedure than the original operation. Dr. Martinez explained the risks with careful professionalism, but I barely listened. The medical details felt secondary to the larger realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. My family had watched me fall and felt nothing except embarrassment about the scene. Rebecca had planned this humiliation carefully, and the others had been complicit through their laughter and inaction. But I had documentation now. Police report, medical records, witness statements. Rebecca's moment of triumph had become evidence of assault. The police arrived while I was in pre-op preparation. Detective Walsh was thorough and unsympathetic to family dynamics that excused violence. "We'll need to review the security footage from your parents' house," she informed me. "Most homes have camera systems these days." Security footage. I hadn't even considered that possibility, but Dad had installed cameras the previous year after a neighborhood break-in. The backyard patio was definitely within range of his system. "The perpetrator is your sister?" Detective Walsh confirmed, reviewing her notes. "Rebecca Davis," I provided. "She's an attorney, if that matters." Walsh's expression suggested it mattered quite a bit, though not in the way Rebecca would prefer. "We'll be in touch after we review the evidence." Jake held my hand as they wheeled me into surgery. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised, "and we're going to make sure this never happens again." As anesthesia pulled me under, my last thought was crystal clear. Rebecca had finally revealed who she really was, and I would never again pretend otherwise. What do you think will happen next when Allison wakes up from surgery? Drop your predictions in the comments below and make sure to hit that like button if you're rooting for justice in this story. Waking up from the second surgery felt different from the first. This time, I wasn't alone and confused in a sterile hospital room. Jake was there, reading a medical journal in the bedside chair, and when my eyes opened, his smile was the first thing I saw. "There she is," he said softly, setting aside his reading. "How are you feeling?" Honestly, like I'd been hit by a truck driven by my own sister. But somehow, despite the pain and the setback and the months of additional recovery ahead, I felt lighter than I had in years. "Free," I answered, surprising myself with the word choice. Jake understood immediately. "No more pretending they care about you." Dr. Martinez appeared for his post-op check, accompanied by a resident who seemed fascinated by the circumstances surrounding my case. "The surgery went well," he reported. "We repaired 2 torn ligaments and addressed the additional tissue damage. You're looking at 12 to 16 weeks of recovery this time. 4 months. 4 months of physical therapy, limited mobility, and careful healing. But this time, I'd be recovering in a house where my presence was welcomed rather than tolerated." "I've already converted my spare room," Jake said when Dr. Martinez left. "Everything's on the first floor, and I've arranged to work from home for the first 2 weeks." His matter-of-fact kindness was overwhelming after weeks of my family's indifference. "Jake, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "That's what people do for someone they care about." Someone they care about. Such a simple concept, but one my family had never quite grasped where I was concerned. Detective Walsh visited that afternoon with updates that made my heart race. "We've reviewed the security footage," she announced without preamble. "The assault is clearly documented. Your sister deliberately removed your mobility aids and caused your fall." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy. Vindication, proof, an end to gaslighting and family mythology that painted me as dramatic or oversensitive. "What happens next?" I asked. "We're filing charges for assault and battery. Given the premeditated nature and the setting, the DA is interested in pursuing this case." Premeditated. The word sent shivers down my spine, but it was accurate. Rebecca hadn't acted in a moment of anger. She'd planned my humiliation and executed it perfectly. She just hadn't planned for my response. "Your family has been trying to contact the hospital," Detective Walsh added. "They're claiming this was an accident, a misunderstanding between sisters." Of course they were. Damage control was the Davis family's specialty, turning victims into villains and rewriting history to protect their reputation. "It wasn't an accident," I said firmly. "The video makes that clear," Walsh agreed. "No jury would interpret deliberate removal of mobility aids as accidental." After she left, I lay in the hospital bed processing the magnitude of what was happening. Criminal charges, court proceedings, my family's private cruelties becoming public record. Jake returned with coffee and the evening news, but I was too wired to focus on external events. "My parents will never speak to me again," I said, testing how that possibility felt. "Would that be such a loss?" he asked quietly. The question hung between us like a challenge. Would it be a loss? These people who'd watched me suffer without offering help, who'd laughed at my pain, who'd spent years taking my support while giving nothing in return? No, I realized aloud. It wouldn't be. Jake's smile was proud and sad simultaneously. "You're going to be okay, Allison. Better than okay." My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Please call us. We need to discuss this situation before it goes too far." Before it goes too far. As if filing charges against someone who'd assaulted me was an overreaction rather than a natural consequence. I deleted the message without responding. The next morning brought discharge papers and a wheelchair that felt different from the previous one. This time it represented temporary necessity rather than helpless dependence. This time I knew exactly where I was going and who would be there to help me heal. As Jake wheeled me out of the hospital, I caught sight of Rebecca's car in the parking lot. She was sitting behind the wheel, phone pressed to her ear, expression animated with whatever story she was selling to whoever would listen. Let her talk. Let her spin. Let her craft whatever narrative made her feel better about what she'd done. The security footage told the only story that mattered, and for the first time in my life, the truth was on my side. "Ready to go home?" Jake asked, helping me into his car. Home. Not the house where I'd been born, where I'd tried so hard to earn love that was never really available. Home was wherever people saw value in taking care of each other. "Ready," I answered, and meant it completely. Jake's house was everything my parents had never been. Welcoming, peaceful, and organized around the needs of the person recovering, rather than the convenience of everyone else. He'd transformed his guest room into a recovery suite, complete with a hospital bed, bedside table stocked with supplies, and a small refrigerator for medications that needed cold storage. "You thought of everything," I marveled, settling into the space that felt more like home after 10 minutes than my childhood bedroom ever had. "I had help," he admitted, gesturing toward a basket of books and magazines on the dresser. "Maria from physical therapy stopped by with reading material. She said recovery goes faster when you have things to occupy your mind besides pain." Maria. My physical therapist had taken time from her schedule to help prepare for my recovery. The contrast with my family's response was stark enough to make me emotional, but these were good tears. Grateful tears. The first week passed in a blur of medication schedules, gentle exercises, and conversations that reminded me what normal relationships looked like. Jake checked on me regularly without hovering, brought me meals without commentary about my appetite, and treated my recovery like a temporary challenge, rather than a personal burden. Detective Walsh called with updates that made the legal proceedings feel increasingly real. "The arraignment is scheduled for next week," she informed me. "Your sister's attorney has been making noise about plea negotiations, but the DA wants to proceed to trial." Trial. The word carried weight I wasn't sure I was prepared to handle. But the alternative was letting Rebecca escape consequences for actions that had derailed my life twice now. "What would a plea deal look like?" I asked. "Probably community service and anger management classes. No admission of guilt. Minimal consequences. Minimal consequences for maximum damage." It sounded exactly like the kind of outcome Rebecca had always managed to arrange for herself. "I want to proceed to trial," I decided. My family's response to the criminal charges was predictably focused on their own embarrassment rather than my well-being. Mom called repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that Jake screened before playing for me. "Allison, honey, please call me back. We need to work this out as a family before lawyers get involved." Too late for that, I thought. Lawyers were already involved. Cameras had captured everything. And working things out as a family had been revealed as code for enabling Rebecca while gaslighting Allison. Dad's approach was more direct. He showed up at Jake's house unannounced, demanding to speak with me about this ridiculous situation that's gotten completely out of hand. Jake answered the door with professional courtesy and personal steel. "Allison is recovering from surgery your daughter necessitated," he informed Dad calmly. "She's not receiving visitors right now. This is family business," Dad blustered. "You have no right to interfere." "I have every right to protect someone who was assaulted in my care," Jake replied firmly. "Good day, Mr. Davis." Through the window, I watched Dad return to his car with slumped shoulders and defeated posture. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for him. He was dealing with consequences of enabling Rebecca's behavior for 30 years, and the bill was finally coming due. But sympathy for his predicament didn't excuse his role in creating it. Rebecca's attorney contacted me directly, which Detective Walsh said was highly inappropriate but not illegal. Lauren Fitzgerald was everything I'd expected from someone Rebecca would hire: polished, intimidating, and completely uninterested in the actual facts of the case. "This is a family dispute that got blown out of proportion," she explained with practiced sincerity. "Rebecca was trying to help you overcome dependence on mobility aids. It was misinterpreted. The gaslighting was so comprehensive it was almost artistic. Rebecca had been helping me by removing my crutches and watching me fall. The assault had been misinterpreted rather than documented on video." "Ms. Fitzgerald," I said carefully, "I have footage of your client deliberately removing my mobility aids and laughing while I was injured. That's not misinterpretation, that's evidence." Her confidence flickered slightly. "There are always multiple ways to interpret any situation." Not this one, I replied. Not anymore. Physical therapy resumed with Maria, who'd followed my case through professional networks and was outraged on my behalf. I've seen a lot of recovery setbacks, she told me during our first session back. But deliberate sabotage by family members? That's a new one. The second surgery had been more invasive, requiring a longer healing timeline and more complex exercises. But my mental state was so much healthier that the physical challenges felt manageable. I was no longer fighting my body's needs while navigating family hostility. You're progressing faster than expected, Maria observed after 3 weeks. Whatever changed in your living situation is working. What changed was everything. I was surrounded by people who wanted me to heal rather than people who resented my need for healing. Jake had become my anchor through it all, managing the practical aspects of recovery while providing emotional support I'd never experienced from my actual family. Our friendship was deepening into something neither of us had named yet, but the potential was obvious to everyone except us. You know he's in love with you, right? Maria mentioned casually during one session. We're just friends, I protested, though my face heated at her observation. Honey, she laughed, friends don't rearrange their entire life to care for someone. That man has been yours since day one. You just needed to be free enough to see it. Free enough. That phrase stayed with me as I continued healing, both physically and emotionally. For the first time in my life, I was free to be vulnerable without fear of exploitation, to need help without shame, to trust that the people around me genuinely wanted my well-being. The trial date was set for 2 months away, for long enough for my physical recovery to progress significantly, but soon enough that the assault remained fresh in everyone's memory. Rebecca, according to Detective Walsh, was not handling the reality of consequences well, but that was no longer my problem to solve. I was free now, and I intended to stay that way. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning when Detective Walsh called with news that changed everything. We found additional footage, she announced without preamble. Your father's security system has multiple angles, including one that captured your sister's face clearly during the assault. I set down my coffee carefully. Jake's attention immediately focused on my side of the conversation. What does that mean? It means we have crystal clear documentation of premeditation. The footage shows your sister watching you, calculating her approach, and then executing the assault with obvious intent. No jury could interpret this as accidental. The weight of vindication was overwhelming. For weeks, I'd worried that family loyalty might trump evidence, that somehow Rebecca's version of events would carry more weight than reality. But video evidence was impossible to argue with or reinterpret. There's more, Detective Walsh continued. The footage also shows the crowd's reaction. Several guests stepped forward to help, then stopped when your family members indicated they shouldn't intervene. That's going to play very poorly for the defense. My family had not only failed to help me, they'd actively prevented others from doing so. The calculation was breathtaking in its cruelty. When will Rebecca see this footage? I asked. Her attorney is being provided discovery materials this afternoon. I suspect we'll hear about plea negotiations very quickly after that. She was right. Lauren Fitzgerald called within hours, her previous confidence completely absent. We need to discuss a resolution, she said without greeting or pleasantries. Perhaps we can arrange something that works for everyone. What kind of resolution? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Community service, anger management, a formal apology. Your sister understands she made a mistake. A mistake. 30 years of cruelty culminating in assault, and it was a mistake. Rebecca's worldview remained unchanged even when facing criminal consequences. What about restitution for my medical bills? I asked. Silence stretched across the phone line. We can discuss financial arrangements as part of a plea agreement. Financial arrangements. Not accountability, not recognition of harm caused, but financial arrangements as if this were a business transaction rather than the destruction of family relationships through violence. I need to think about it, I said, ending the call before she could apply more pressure. Jake had been listening from the kitchen, and his expression was carefully neutral when I found him. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking Rebecca has never faced real consequences for anything she's done, I replied slowly. And a plea deal means she never will. But a trial means months of depositions, testimony, media attention. Your whole family will be exposed publicly. He was right. Of course. A trial would be painful for everyone, including innocent parties like Uncle Robert who'd tried to help me. But the alternative was letting Rebecca escape with minimal inconvenience, while I lived with the consequences of her actions for months. She ended my career trajectory, I said aloud, working through my thoughts. This second surgery means I'll be out of work for 4 months total. I'll lose my health insurance, probably my apartment, definitely my savings. Jake's expression grew troubled. You'll stay here as long as you need to. Money isn't an issue. His generosity was touching. But it wasn't the point. It's not about having somewhere to go, Jake. It's about the fact that Rebecca destroyed my stability and independence because she felt like it. And now she wants to apologize her way out of consequences. That evening, Mom made another attempt at family reconciliation by appearing on Jake's doorstep with a casserole and tears. Jake let her in reluctantly, staying close enough to intervene if necessary. "Sweetheart," she began, settling into the living room chair like she'd been invited. "This has gone too far. We need to handle this as a family." "We tried handling it as a family," I replied from my position on the couch. "You watched Rebecca assault me and laughed. That's not what happened," she protested weakly. "It was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Mom, there's video footage, clear, unambiguous documentation of exactly what happened." Her composure cracked slightly. "The lawyers say the footage can be interpreted different ways. Then the lawyers are lying to you, probably because Rebecca is paying them to." She tried a different approach. "Think about what this is doing to our family. Your father is having chest pains from stress. Michael's restaurant is suffering because people are talking. This needs to end." The audacity was stunning. My family's reputation was suffering because Rebecca had committed assault, and somehow this was my fault for refusing to cover it up. Where was this concern for family when Rebecca was humiliating me in front of 30 people? I asked. "She was frustrated," Mom offered lamely. "You know how she gets when she thinks people are taking advantage." Taking advantage. I was using crutches prescribed by a surgeon, and somehow that constituted taking advantage of Rebecca's generosity. "Mom," I said gently, "I need you to leave, and I need you to understand that your loyalty to Rebecca over your other child has consequences." She left with the casserole untouched and tears that seemed genuine but came 30 years too late. Jake sat beside me after she'd gone. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I answered, surprising myself with how true it felt. For the first time in my life, I'm free to make decisions based on what's right instead of what keeps the family happy. 2 days later, I called Detective Walsh with my decision. No plea deal. Full trial. Let Rebecca face a jury and explain why assault was justified because I was inconveniencing her with my medical needs. It was time for the truth to be told completely, regardless of who found it uncomfortable. The trial began on a crisp October morning that felt symbolic somehow. New season, new chapter, new reality where my family's private cruelties would be examined under public scrutiny. I'd been dreading and anticipating this day for months, and as Jake helped me navigate the courthouse steps with my canes, I felt surprisingly calm. Rebecca sat at the defense table in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her expression carefully composed into what I recognized as her professional competence mask. She didn't look at me when I entered the courtroom, but her attorney, Lauren Fitzgerald, did, her gaze calculating and cold. Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen had prepared me thoroughly for what to expect. "Jury selection went well," he'd explained the previous week. "We have several people with family members who've needed mobility assistance. They understand what deliberate sabotage means in that context." The prosecution's opening statement was clinical and devastating. Chen laid out the timeline methodically. My initial injury, the months of recovery, my progress from wheelchair to crutches, and then the moment when Rebecca decided to destroy that progress in the most public and humiliating way possible. The defendant didn't act in anger, Chen told the jury. She acted with calculation. The security footage shows her watching the victim, timing her approach, and executing an assault that she knew would cause maximum physical and emotional damage. Fitzgerald's opening was exactly what I'd expected. Family dispute blown out of proportion, misunderstood sisterly concern, tragic accident mischaracterized as criminal intent. She painted Rebecca as the caring sister trying to help me overcome psychological dependence on mobility aids. The phrase made my stomach turn. Psychological dependence on medically prescribed crutches, as if my healing femur was a matter of mental weakness rather than surgical hardware. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Dr. Martinez testified about the extensive damage from my second surgery, explaining how deliberate removal of weight-bearing support could cause exactly the injuries I'd sustained. Maria described the physical therapy progress that had been erased, requiring months of additional recovery. But it was the security footage that sealed Rebecca's fate. Chen played it 3 times for the jury. Wide angle showing the party atmosphere, medium shot capturing Rebecca's approach and calculation, and close-up clearly documenting her grabbing my crutches and my subsequent fall. The The sound was devastating too. The crack of my knees hitting concrete, my gasp of pain, and most damaging of all, the laughter from my family members. I watched Rebecca's face as the footage played. Her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly each time, especially when the jury could clearly see her satisfaction at my pain. The defense's case fell apart quickly. Fitzgerald tried to argue that Rebecca had been trying to encourage my independence, but the video evidence made that interpretation impossible. Character witnesses for Rebecca painted her as a dedicated professional and loving sister, but their testimony felt hollow against visual proof of assault. Uncle Robert testified for the prosecution, his reluctance obvious but his integrity intact. "I started to help her," he said quietly, describing the moments after my fall. But her father gestured for me to stop. The family seemed to want her to remain on the ground. Those words hung in the courtroom like an indictment of everything the Davis family represented. Jake's testimony was powerful in its simplicity. He described finding me after the first surgery, alone and unsupported. He explained the daily care routine that my family had been unwilling to provide. His love for me was obvious to everyone in the room, including the jury who watched him with growing sympathy. "In your medical opinion," Chen asked during direct examination, "was the plaintiff dependent on her mobility aids for psychological reasons?" "Absolutely not," Jake replied firmly. "She had recent surgical hardware and explicit medical orders for limited weight bearing. Using crutches wasn't psychological dependence. It was following doctor's orders to prevent additional injury. When I testified, I felt surprisingly steady. Months of physical therapy had rebuilt my strength, and months away from my family's gaslighting had rebuilt my confidence. I told my story simply and directly. The accident, the surgery, my family's indifference, Rebecca's escalating cruelty, and finally the assault that had brought us all here. Fitzgerald's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. She tried to paint me as dramatic, attention-seeking, someone who'd blown a family disagreement out of proportion. But every question she asked gave me another opportunity to reference the video evidence that contradicted her narrative. "Isn't it true that your sister was concerned about your psychological dependence on mobility aids?" she pressed. "No," I replied calmly. "It's true that my sister was irritated by my medical needs and decided to resolve her irritation through assault." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all charges, assault, battery, and criminal endangerment, Rebecca's carefully maintained facade finally cracked completely. She actually gasped, as if consequences for her actions were an impossible surprise. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, but as we left the courthouse, I felt a closure I hadn't expected. Not because Rebecca would face jail time, though she would, but because 12 strangers had looked at evidence of my family's cruelty and declared unequivocally that it was wrong. My truth had been heard, believed, and validated. Jake squeezed my hand as we navigated the courthouse steps. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like freedom," I answered, and meant it completely. Rebecca was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and full restitution for my medical expenses. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, seemed personally offended by the deliberate nature of the assault. "Family relationships carry special obligations of care and protection," she said during sentencing. The defendant's violation of those obligations, captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people, represents a profound betrayal of basic human decency. Rebecca cried during the sentencing. Not the calculated tears she'd used throughout our childhood to escape consequences, but genuine shock that her actions had finally caught up with her. Dad sat in the gallery behind her, looking aged by the entire experience. Mom hadn't come at all. I felt surprisingly little as I watched my sister led away in handcuffs. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet peace that comes from seeing justice served. The media attention died down quickly, but the family consequences lingered. Michael closed his restaurant within 6 months, unable to recover from the negative publicity. Dad took early retirement, claiming health issues but really fleeing the whispered conversations that followed him everywhere. Mom made one final attempt at reconciliation, appearing at Jake's house 6 months after the trial with a carefully rehearsed speech about forgiveness and moving forward. "Families make mistakes," she said, settling uninvited into the living room where I was reading. "But we're still family. That has to count for something." I looked at her carefully. This woman who'd given birth to me but never really seen me. "What mistake did I make, Mom?" "You know what I mean," she replied uncomfortably. "No, I don't. Rebecca assaulted me. You and Dad enabled it. I called for help and refused to pretend it didn't happen. Which part of that was my mistake?" She couldn't answer because there wasn't an answer that didn't indict her own choices. The mistake I'd made was believing that family meant something more than shared genetics and convenient mythology. "I think you should leave," I said gently. "And I think you should understand that your choice to prioritize Rebecca's comfort over my safety has permanent consequences." She left without the reconciliation she'd expected, and I never saw her again. But I'd gained so much more than I'd lost. Jake and I married the following spring in a small ceremony that felt like a celebration of survival rather than just love. The guest list included Maria from physical therapy, Detective Walsh, Uncle Robert, and a handful of friends who'd supported me through the worst period of my life. No Davis family members attended. Their absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. I returned to work part-time initially, then full-time as my physical strength rebuilt. The nonprofit promoted me within a year, recognizing leadership qualities that had been invisible when I was constantly managing family drama and crisis. My knee healed completely, though I still carry a slight limp on rainy days. It serves as a useful reminder that survival sometimes leaves visible marks, but those marks don't define your future. Jake and I bought a house with a single-story layout and a garden where I grow vegetables that remind me daily of my power to nurture things into healthy growth. We host dinners for friends who understand that chosen family often provides what biological family cannot. Sometimes people ask if I miss my parents, my siblings, the connection to people who knew me from birth. The answer is complicated, but ultimately clear. I miss the family I thought I had, but I don't miss the family I actually had. The family I thought I had never really existed. The people who loved me unconditionally, who supported me through difficulties, who celebrated my successes and cushioned my failures. Those people lived only in my imagination, projected onto relatives who were incapable of providing what I needed. The family I actually had was a collection of people bound by genetics and shared history who used those connections to justify treating me as a convenient resource rather than a person deserving respect. Rebecca was the cruelest, but she was enabled by parents who prioritized peace over justice, image over truth, and their own comfort over their daughter's well-being. Losing them wasn't really loss. It was recognition of what had never been there to begin with. Rebecca served 14 months of her sentence and was released early for good behavior. She moved to another state, started over with a new job, and carefully curated social media presence that made no mention of family or criminal history. We have no contact, which suits us both perfectly. 6 months ago, I testified before the state legislature about family violence and the importance of prosecuting domestic assault regardless of relationship dynamics. The bill I supported passed unanimously, extending protection to adult family members in situations similar to mine. Standing at that podium, speaking truth to power about survival and accountability, I felt the full weight of my transformation. The girl who'd spent 28 years trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important life lessons about family, boundaries, and the courage to choose your own well-being over other people's comfort. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who don't know how to love you back. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you were given. And sometimes, justice delayed is still justice served. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that healing is possible, accountability matters, and you deserve better than people who ask you to minimize your pain for their convenience. Your voice matters. Your pain matters, and your decision to protect yourself matters more than anyone's opinion about what family loyalty should look like. Stay strong and know that somewhere out there, someone like me is cheering for your courage to choose yourself.